It's a pleasure to be back on the GMAT Club channel. And, today we have a really exciting discussion. I have with me, Tripti Singh, who heads our Master's Admissions Advisory team. We would love to talk about MBA versus the MIM. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Tripti to take us through, what to expect in this session.
Thank you, Natasha, for that. So let's think a little bit about what is the key areas or parameters that you need to be aware of when you're looking at an MBA, Masters in Business Administration, versus a Masters in Management. Both are master's degrees, both are graduate degrees. So then, what is this whole next 1 hour going to be about? The next 1 hour is going to be about these four key areas of thought. Our hope is, Natasha and I are hoping that by the end of this conversation today, at the end of this 1 hour today, you're going to go away with a lot of insight on all of these four criteria. Whether it's what your ambition and goal, how are you going to really realize what your eligibility is, what are the key differences between these two programs, and therefore, what should you be looking at next? Okay, this 1 hour is over. Now you've understood your fit. So what comes next? So our hope is that we take you through some of these points today. Of course, each applicant who works with us is very unique in their story, in their profile, in their narrative, in their pitch. So personalized guidance is something that's going to happen over and above. And if you stay on till the very end of the session, you'll know why I'm saying this right now, because there's some surprise coming up for you attendees today. But the hope is that you're going to spend this 1 hour with us, sit back and really sponge in all the information. And then by the time they come to the last slide, you will have a much deeper insight into where you're fitting in, and therefore what are the steps you need to take to make timely applications for fall 2025. Now, I'm going to let Natasha, if you could just change this slide, please. Right. So when we look at an MBA or an MIM, I'm going to let Natasha first take us into the MBA and the goal strategies along with it. And then I'll take you through a little bit of what the MIM means for that. Over to you, Natasha.
Yeah, I think, this is the point at which the conversation really starts, right? When you start thinking about what is the program that you really want to apply for. And, it can be extremely overwhelming to sort through, just the level of detail that you're going to find on, the public domain. So what I want to do first is start with the process of self reflection, what it involves, because that is really going to inform how you evaluate the various programs that are available and how you then look at a program and an application that's the right fit for you. From the MBA perspective, I think the first thing that you need to think about is, whether you're looking at the degree to accelerate your career, whether you're looking at really developing your skills as a leader, whether that is dealing with complex business scenarios or whether that is dealing with, people issues or, the complexity of just getting a team or an organization invested in your particular perspective or your solution. So when you think of an MBA, you need to really reflect on these elements about how you want your career to look, in the next 3 to 5 years, how you're going to connect that with the existing body of experience, that work experience that you already have, and how do you develop as a leader who carries others along with your vision. You need to think about your goals for an MBA from three primary perspectives. Where do you see your post MBA career really playing out? Which geography do you see it playing out? What sector do you see yourself, being a part of? And, what are the kind of roles or teams that you see yourself being a part of? And an important connector needs to be with your pre MBA work experience. You're also going to be thinking about maybe new business opportunities, because the work experience you've had till that point will really give you a lot of perspective into opportunity areas or challenges around very core business problems. So you want to capitalize on that perspective, develop it with an MBA, and then think about new business opportunities. You may also be thinking about, at this particular stage of your career, you may be wanting to build a network of engaged individuals with similar career paths, with similar career interests. And you want a community that includes maybe mentors or maybe others with, the same kind of specialized experience that you bring to the program. You may also want to look at certain deciding factors. And those deciding factors as to whether you take an MBA are really going to be rooted in your industry preferences. And how you really want to look at building those lifelong bonds, which are going to further your career interests, not just in the short term, but also, over the next 10 years. Another primary consideration could also be cost, because when you're thinking of whether to do an MIM or whether to do a master's or whether to do an MBA, cost can play a primary role in deciding where your interest finally is going to land. And I know Tripti is nodding her head, so she also has a perspective based on the applicants that she works with. So I mean, Tripti, I'm really interested to hear your views here.
Right. Natasha, I agree with you on everything that you said about an MBA. And, in the sense that the goals have to align regardless of which general management program it is, an MBA or an MIM. But I'm going to take this conversation one step back. And the first thing I want to tell everybody is that an MIM comes at the back of a specialized undergraduate degree. So if you have a BCom or a BBA or a BBM, and you already have an undergraduate general management degree, and then you're straight finishing that and instantly looking at MIM, you're already overqualified. So your priority must lie on why do you need a general management degree. That's where you start thinking first, right? And then when you've identified your goals, now you have to start thinking about your knowledge gaps. And that's where MIM would actually factor in, maybe even over other master's programs, like a master's in finance or a master's in sustainability management or some other specialized finance program or master's program that you might be looking at. Then you would negate those and you would still stick in the realm of general management. Otherwise, you'll always be confused between, well, am I looking at that specialization or am I really looking at a generalist master's? So you have to first very clearly know that you're looking at a general management at the back of already a specialized undergrad degree. So now you want to patch that up with a general management degree. That's where an MIM would first feature into your goal strategy. Right. Now that we've discussed a little bit about when an MIM makes sense, which is, your undergrad degree would have a non-management degree, right? Therefore, what are your other eligibility criteria? When you look at an MIM program, the very first thing that you need to understand is that if you have more than 2 years of work experience, Natasha, can I encourage you to just change the slide for me, please? Thank you. If you already have a management background, so an MIM is something that you're overqualified for. And the other thing is that if you have over 2 years of work experience, let me put this in perspective. Say you're applying for fall 2025 and you graduated in June 2024. All right. So then May 2024 to May 2025, you have 1 year work experience. August or September, you start your program. You do not have 2 years work experience. So you can apply for an MIM. You're still eligible. But if you are going to apply for 2026, then you're going to have 2 years plus work experience. You're already overqualified. So that should actually point out to you the very first key eligibility criteria for an MIM is you cannot have too much work experience. And the second I said to you was, you cannot already have a general management undergrad degree, because then you have to justify why you need another general management degree so soon after you've just finished one. All right. Most universities in the United States, some in Canada as well, will take either a GRE or a GMAT. Standardized assessment. Now, a GRE is a graduate record examination, and GMAT is a graduate management aptitude test. So, by the virtue of the name, you know already that a GMAT is ideally a better fit. And typically, there is this misnomer that goes around, which is like, GMAT is more quant heavy and GRE is more verbal heavy. Well, I'm going to just tell you upfront, GMAT is more application based, is management aptitude test. So there is a lot of problem solving, critical thinking that happens in the test itself. GRE is more of an aptitude of your verbal and your quant abilities. So if you're looking at the United States or parts of Canada, then you could potentially just do either or. I do know European and UK and even Singapore and Australian universities, business schools for an MIM would prefer a GMAT score. right? And you can do the GMAT focus edition. You don't need to do the generalized GMAT at all. And then you would need to do an English test if you are coming from a country that is a non-native English speaking country. So if you're from India, then you would need to do an English test. If you're from the UK applying to the US, or from Canada applying to the UK, then you wouldn't need an English test for yourself. Now, of course, if you have internships, it helps. It always helps if you have internships, if you have projects, but they're not required because this is a fresh off the boat graduate program. It's a program that is expecting you to join immediately after an undergraduate degree. They're not really expecting you to have spent time learning a skill. There needs to be some realization for sure. You need to be a little aware as to why you want to do a general management degree. If you are a doctor, for example, and you've just finished your medicine or you're doing a residency and now you want to get into hospital administration, and you don't want to get into this niche of masters in hospital administration, then you can do an MIM degree. If you're an engineer who's looking at getting into consulting, you would do an MIM. So there has to be a moment of realization, and internships can justify them, projects can justify them, sometimes academic research can justify short-term goals, right? So, but there has to be that moment of realization, but that's it. You don't really need to have any of that. And the costs are steep. You know, if I'm looking at 40 to 70 US dollars, I'm looking at it including accommodation as well. But remember one thing, that while most science based master's programs in the US specifically and in Canada are 2 years, even in Australia, because the master's in management is offered from a business school, it is typically sometimes 1.5 years if it's quite intense. But most often, business school programs have now woken up to the reality that people who are coming into a business school, they want a quicker ROI. So they will come out of that much quicker. So they will not keep you there for 2 years. Natasha, do you feel like that's the same for an MBA as well in terms of the time spent on the program?
No, so I maybe want to give like a more specific perspective for the MBA, and there are like very significant points of difference here. So when you look at doing your MBA, you need to remember that at that point of time you would have a few years of work experience. Typically, if I look at someone applying for a global MBA, they would have anywhere between like 3 and 5 years of work experience. So at that point, the evaluation of your candidature becomes extremely holistic because there are many elements that would balance each other out. The one thing that I want to mention is when you're applying for an MBA, it is important that you provide the business school with the confidence that you would be able to do well in a very academically rigorous and a very quant rigorous kind of course matter. So your undergraduate college results are important just as they would be for any other course, but specifically even within that, the schools would want to understand how rigorous your undergrad curriculum is on the quant side, and they would want to understand how your specific like your scores look like across the different years of your undergrad in those subjects. So that is going to be fairly important. Ever since testing has moved to the focus edition or the new edition of the GRE and the GMAT, there is an increased focus on how your undergrad scores kind of back up your ability to manage data heavy courses. So that's something to keep in mind. Another data point which is very important is for an MBA, whether you do the GRE or the GMAT or the executive assessment, you will be evaluated on par with other applicants who may have done all these courses. Because, like I said, the evaluation is holistic, given that people who apply for the MBA will typically have more years of work experience. And what will be important at that time is, like I've mentioned on the slide, is really the kind of sector experience you have. Is that in line with your goals? Have you progressed in your career? Have you kind of shown that you have transferable skills that have helped you at each stage of your career? Do you have extracurricular activities that would show your ability to engage with various communities or support causes outside of work? These elements also become very important when you are looking at an MBA, and I will specify that these parameters would be applicable for any global MBA program of repute. Also, you have to keep in mind that the MBA is perhaps the most expensive master's course that you'd invest your time in. So while there's a broad range of costs, and depending on the university that you finally land on and the country that you land on, but if you look at what you would be expected to pay in maybe in the top 20 colleges, and I would include in this not only tuition costs, but I would also include other administrative costs, cost of living, things like that, you can easily expect to pay a hefty sum per year. And over here, again, I'd want to mention that if you're looking at an MBA, typically you'd pay for a full time MBA, you would spend a 2 year period on campus. And while there are programs that offer you the option of a 1 year program versus a 2 year program, typically if you want to get maximum return on investment, you want to like really gain the benefit of being on campus, a 2 year program really might suit your needs more, because you have a lot of opportunities to be involved with the community, with internships, and gain, just a hugely valuable, experience. So Tripti, I just want to mention that because it just differs so much from the MIM experience. So I think these are some things that someone really would need to know. And with that, I just want to move to the next slide, Tripti. So I think it's important to remember that when we talk about these degrees, each degree is really very, very different. With an MBA, given the stage of life that people are entering the program at, there is an emphasis on gaining more general management skills, which would include, strategic thinking abilities, the ability or the perspective that you would want to build to deal with problems and ambiguity at a very complex level. You would want to maybe gain an experience of not only how to manage the day-to-day business problems, but also look at identifying opportunities, like I said, in sectors. And another important element of developing yourself or your brand during your MBA is also going to be developing your leadership skills. You really want to emerge at the other side of those 2 years as someone with an understanding of not only how to manage yourself, but also how to deliver or to performance through people who work under you. So it's important to remember that with an MBA, you're building more strategic skills, you're broadening your perspective, and you're looking at real world problems or engaging with real world problems throughout the time that you're spending on campus. You will also need to look at some broader socio-economic influences, political influences, the political landscape, and understand how those would have an impact on the sector and the business problems that you really want to work on. So I think Tripti, I think the MIM again would give you a very different perspective on this particular in this area, right?
Right, Natasha. And what really differs is the entire experience of an MIM versus an MBA. So, for example, with an MBA, because you're going in with work experience, you are actually a part of the talent of the class, because your experience adds value to the cohort. It adds value to the way the case studies are being studied. It adds value to the way concepts are being understood. And the MIM, Natasha, on the other hand, is still your faculty teaching you in the class, standing ahead in the class, and you listening to them theoretically, gaining a deeper sense of what is general management. So I think that's where the difference just gets, if I had to just unbox that difference, your focus is on building management skills. You don't have an idea what burnout means. You've never experienced burnout. So when a professor in the topic talent management or human resources is talking about burnout and is asking you to evaluate a case study when something like that happened, and then there was some suicides or whatever in the corporate space, and then you are just listening to it theoretically in an MIM class, because you're trying to build these concepts, you're trying to build an expertise so you can get started in your professional journey. Whereas in an MBA class, you're there is equity in the value that you bring to the class, right? And back, I think a couple of slides ago, Natasha, you also mentioned, be clear about where you want to study and what you want to study. And what I want to tell people for an MIM is, look at a good business school, because a good business school is the right platform. Don't be married to the location of that business school, because a business school, at the end of the day, for you coming from a different country, going into a different economy, is anyway a groundbreaking experience. The hustle that you have to do now as a young adult, the networking that you'll have to try and build, and you don't really know how to, because you've been in this little bit of a bubble undergrad up until now. you've never really been in the workforce, you haven't really communicated at those levels of professional language and things like that. So you're just building these brand new skills. And for you to be able to do that, a good business school is important. Don't be married to the location, if that's possible. And be focused on getting those experiences, joining those clubs, doing those innovation labs and those networking mixers, and doing those things that allow you to build those skills in a safe environment where nobody's really judging you. And so that when you actually find that first job of yours after an MIM, you have those skills to at least start practicing them in the workspace. In an MBA, it's the exact opposite. People already have those skills. People already, they are not really looking to per se build those softer skills. They come with it because they've already had work experience and now they're taking it to another level, right? And so then, therefore, Natasha, we could move on to the next slide. Then I can talk a little bit about what is therefore you, what is therefore important from your perspective and what do you control, right? When we look at an MIM, because it's a fresh off the board degree, and I know Natasha also mentioned that the data of the undergraduate score is still important for an MBA. It's not like that importance goes away, right? So don't get fooled, guys, when when universities say, well, we are holistic in admissions. Everybody wants academically strong student. Everybody wants somebody who can cope with their academic rigor, right? As much as you are looking at a business school for the fit, they are also looking at you for a fit, right? So let's not fool ourselves. Data is important. But here in this case, your college grades and a progressively upward GPA is critical because you're a young student. You're coming in fresh from undergraduate college. They want to make sure that you have been working hard and you're going to add value to the academic community. It is a program of completely academic in nature. And therefore, your standardized test scores matter. And then the college that you're coming from also matters. It matters whether you have a quant background. It matters whether you only, which is why if you're coming from general management to general management, you're already overqualified. You're somebody who doesn't need that education. But your talent matters. What have you done outside the classroom matters. How much that contributes to your success, projected and predicted success, that matters. And then matter all the things that are called your voice in the application, the resume, the standardized, the essays that you write, statement of purpose, the letter of recommendation. When somebody recommends you and that third person perspective comes into play, that's the only piece of document that somebody can see which talks about you from a third person, right? So an admission officer can read you from somebody else's perspective. So now they know what kind of a student to expect on their campus. And then, of course, how much you engage with that community, whether you're attending college webinars, and you don't have to really go visit a campus, but you can download the newsletter, follow somebody on LinkedIn, attend a couple of admissions events. So then you're kind of showing to a university that you're keenly interested, and also that gives you great fodder for your essays. What do you think, Natasha?
Yeah, I think I want to just add my voice to this because when you're building your pitch for an MBA, you are at a point in your career where you can speak with some degree of authority on certain, areas of work or professional interests that would set you apart from other applicants. So, in the MBA pitch, what is important is to remember that yes, data points are important. Your undergrad CGPA, your test scores, any professional certifications that you have, they add a lot of weight to your ability to be able to manage the conceptual rigor, the academic rigor of the course. But apart from that, for the MBA, what is like a differentiator from someone applying for an MIM is really going to be how you present your pre-MBA work experience. Are you able to demonstrate measurable impact, and are you able to demonstrate consistent growth through your career? Internships and projects are important because they indicate someone who is a self-starter, someone who's really gained some really exceptional early experiences to certain kinds of business scenarios. Apart from that, on the MBA application, you really have different documents that you could use to build your pitch to business school. And what I've done is I've ordered them on the MBA side. I've ordered them in in the descending order of priority. So what will be the center of your what will be at the center of your application is really going to be your resume, and your resume gives them an admissions officer a chronology of everything that you've done. It answers questions in terms of, it gives them indicative answers to questions like why certain things are important to you, what you seem to engage with, what is the direction of the impact that you're making. After that, recommendation letters, tend to be very important because they will show the school, it gives them a third party perspective on a lot of the things that you have mentioned on your resume, and it gives them an understanding of what you've done well with, well on, what is it that you engage with regularly, and how do others view your performance and your drive. And that gives them a good sense of the person that's going to be before them in an interview. The application form, again, is an important document because on your MBA application form, not only are you providing the school with objective information, but you're also talking about various other elements like your background. You may be also asked to talk about the reason for certain professional choices or job changes that you've made. You will also be asked to talk about, in the case of certain schools like CBS or LBS, the degree to which you've engaged with the school before submitting an application. And you'll also be able to indicate to the school certain achievements you've had and certain interests, professional and otherwise, that you would want to have as an MBA student. The essays then come in the order of priority because the essays will really add a lot of color to the business school pitch. And here is something that's really unique to the MBA application. The essays will cover a broad spectrum of topics. You're not writing an SOP, you're not writing a personal statement. But apart from talking about why you'd want to do an MBA or why you'd want to go to X school, you'll also be asked questions which will enable you to really showcase your personality. So you may be, in some cases, asked to talk about 25 unique things about yourself. You may be asked to talk about your sense of purpose in life. You may even be asked to, talk about times when you've provided a safe space for others to express themselves. So DEI focused essays could also be an important part of your application. All of these are really good opportunities for you to tell the school who you are and what interests you, because that will give them a good sense of how you will show up for the community when you're at business school. The interview is again an important part of the application, just as it is for any program that you apply to. But again, the interview for an MBA program is going to be focused not only on your drive or your reasons for wanting to pursue an MBA, but it's also going to ask you to talk about a lot of behavioral situations that you would have found yourself in, times when you've had to engage with others, times when you've had to convince others, and times when you've had to manage conflicting priorities or conflict in general. So in that sense, it's really going to dig deep into what your experience in the professional world has been so far, to get a sense of, like I said, who's going to show up on campus. And I think before we go ahead, I do want to tell anyone who's watching the session that do start placing your questions in the Q&A box, because we are going to start answering those when we go through the next slide, which Tripti, I'm just going to move to right now. I'm going to now talk about the focus areas for an MBA application. So the previous slides giving you a sense of, the sections where you're going to be able to demonstrate to the school your authentic voice. Your resume is going to be at the start of it, but another focus area which will enable you to write great essays or really demonstrate fit with the school is going to be your school research. And we've done webinars with GMAT Club before on the topic of MBA school research, but your school research is going to help you define why the school is a good fit for you, which will again speak to the third focus area, which is your goals development. Because as you develop your goals, you need to be able to connect the dots between the schools that you have an interest in and how they're going to be relevant to your goals. Number four is really going to be profile development, because your application to business school isn't only contingent on the application, but on how you develop certain qualities so that you take the full benefit of a really standout business program. So working on ways in which you engage with others, both in the workplace as well as outside of it, ways in which you demonstrate mentorship, ways in which you show up for others, and help others. All of these are really critical parts that you want to focus on at least for a year before you apply to business school. Standardized tests, an important data point that you would want to focus on. Essay development is a critical part where a lot of the elements that we've spoken about before this, which is school research, the elements that pertain to how you've developed your profile and how those are relevant to your goals. All of these will be encapsulated in the essay. So spending time on developing your essays is really a critical part of the process. Cultivating recommenders is another important area because your recommenders need to have a deep overview of the work that you've done before your MBA, and they need to be able to highlight different ways in which you have performed well at work, times when you've really been of use or help to others, and how the impact areas that you speak about are um, of, of significant importance to them as they view your performance. Subjective answers on the application form are another important focus area because a lot of those have to do with choice, and they will be an important part of your application because they connect what's mentioned on your resume with other elements such as your drive, your ambition, and your letters of recommendation. And I think, Tripti, I'd want to move to the MIM application because that will be an interesting, differentiator.
Right. And actually, Natasha, college shortlisting, for example, is equally important here as well. Um, in our case, I mean, in my experience, what I've noticed is that when people are looking at an MIM, they will sometimes get disillusioned by the fact that not all top business schools offer an MIM. So sometimes the confusion is, well, then should I just then apply for an MBA? And my very short answer to your very specific question is no, not unless you have a lot of work experience, in which case, anyway, you're overqualified for an MIM. So the college list process is far more important for you to be able to understand your fit for the program and the program's fit for your goals than you looking at a list of colleges and saying these are the top 20 business schools in the world, so I'm just going to apply to them regardless of whether I have an MIM, whether they offer an MIM or an MBA, right? So when you're doing your college shortlist, when you look deeper into what those program offers and what are the kind of curriculum electives that I have and what are the kind of opportunities I have with the faculty engagement, you're going to be able to find those programs in those business schools that are very, very good and strong pedigrees. Maybe you just don't know about them. So that, Natasha, is something that is very important from in an MIM perspective, because there's a lot of education that has to happen for an MIM focused group. The other thing on the resume is that I have noticed that the MBA resumes, for example, they lead with the work experience, because you did speak about pre-MBA work ex being very, very critical. And for an MIM program, your education section will lead your resume because you are going in as a student, and as a fresh student you'll be a student. So the focus is on the educational journey that you had thus far, and your internships, I told you, they could look good, but they're not as important. So your education section will be first in the resume. Recommendation letters, exactly like the way Natasha said, it's very important to hear that third person perspective about who you are and who you will represent to be on the community, within the community and on their campus. Standardized tests are important. English test is an important parameter, indicator of future success. Let me just put it like that. And the essay, whether the personal statement, which it's called in the United Kingdom and in Canada, and it's called an SOP in the United States, that is also similarly to an MBA essay, talking about leadership, talking about your area of shine. But the difference is that you've not really had a lot of opportunities to create impact yet. It's not like you've been able to really impact the revenue of a service line and lead a vertical and things like that just yet, because you're so young. So then they are looking at examples of future success. Whether in college you've been super active and you've led a club initiative, and they want to see whether you have strategic thinking, whether you have critical thinking, whether you're a problem solver in life. From all those unique college experiences, if you have to rely on your high school journey to be able to pull out those areas of focus and examples, then it's too far in the past. It has to be things that you did in college, things that you're currently doing while you're doing your final year. You're managing your time effectively, you're multitasking efficiently. That's the kind of things that they want to see. If as a student you can do all of that right now, those are indicators for future success. When, like I said, if you are because for an MIM, you have to be a non-management person, right? So if you're doing medicine, for example, you're doing psychology, or you're doing engineering, for example, then you must showcase that moment of truth. When was it that you decided that you don't want to pursue what you were currently pursuing, which is fine, by the way. Not all of us study and work within the same area or focus area. So, if you are an engineer currently and then now you're looking at management for consulting, for example, there has to be a moment where that happened, that switch happened within you. And then from that point to now, when you're applying to my university, what have you done to engage this interest? How have you delved deeper into it? Oh, I read Atomic Habits and I read The Subtle Art of Not Giving and I read Who Moved My Cheese and I decided. Well, okay, great. Reading is one way to do it. And then what? And then what? And then what? So there has to be those touch points of academic interest that you have engaged in to finally be able to convince yourself and therefore the admission committee that, look, I know when I'm making this switch into management from my specialized undergrad degree, I am coming from a place of deep clarity. I'm not coming to you just with aspirations and hopes and a sense of what I want to do. So that's very important. So point number 6, if you have to take anything away from this slide, it's point number 6. And then we spoke a little bit about demonstrating our interest by following newsletters, subscribing to their channels, following them on Instagram, things like that. And finally, yes, there are interviews, and after COVID, it's become more and more critical that that business schools are looking at third-party video interview platforms to get video essays and interviews out. They definitely want to see that the person who's written the essay is in fact the person who's going to be in their classroom. So, you want to make sure that you prep yourself, you refine your communication skills so you're able to present yourself in the best light to get that admit that you so rightfully deserve. Right? All right. We move on from here, Natasha, to dispelling some common misconceptions. And I can see there's somebody who's asked us a couple of questions. So I'm going to quickly go over this slide and I can start off by answering your question and then we can consequently move on to other questions. Can I do an MBA? Can I do an MIM before an MBA? Technically, yes. You can do an MIM before you do an MBA because an MIM doesn't need more than 3 years work experience. MBA needs more than 3 years work experience. You will have to justify to the business school admission officers why you need another management degree. You already got one. What did you do with it? And therefore, why now do you need it? Right?
And Tripti, I'd want to just add to that because there will be certain schools where they will not, look at it favorably if you have a management, degree, whether it's a master's degree or another, whether it's a diploma, an MIM, or initial master MBA. So there are some schools which do not consider it favorably. So what you're saying is extremely correct. If you're doing an MIM and you're thinking about doing an MBA at a later stage, you really need to define what is going to be the difference in the learning experience that you're hoping to have.
Exactly. Exactly. And can I pursue an MBA post an MIM? Well, this is the reverse of the first question. And so my answer would be exactly the same. Therefore, right, when you look at an MBA degree and then you already have an MIM degree, you're not going to feel the need for an MBA. Because an MIM will set you on that right path to success, like an MBA would have had you waited for some more years of work experience and then gotten an MBA. And here, when somebody's already asked us in the chat box that can we get into the same position in a company after doing an MIM as an MBA, theoretically, eventually, yes. When you apply to my company, for example, as an MIM, you are coming in with very little pre-graduate school work experience. So even though I'm hiring you as a consultant or an analyst in my management consulting firm, I'm hiring you at a lesser experience level because you don't have that much experience. Whereas if I am hiring you as an MBA graduate, you are already coming in with a very backed up resume. Your resume is already gotten cushioning because of the pre-MBA work experience. So on the basis of that, you're just starting a higher, more senior position because you're coming in with that broad-based work experience, right? The third question here is, do I need a 4-year undergraduate degree? Natasha, why don't you answer that for us?
I think I'm going to give the MBA perspective because it really depends on the country that you are choosing for your MBA degree. So if you're applying to Europe and the UK, this may not really be the question that you need to ask because you will be eligible. If you are applying to US business schools, there are some schools that may ask for a 4 year, but by and large, and you always check this on the FAQ section of any business school. But by and large, your 3 year undergrad degree should be accepted. There will be some schools that will evaluate it on a case by case basis. And there are some schools which will clearly spell out that they require a 4 year undergrad degree, but by and large, the 3 year undergrad degree will be valid. So,
And
but I believe it's exactly the opposite for the MIM, right, Tripti?
yes, yes, it's definitely the opposite for MI and MIM. And Natasha, I do think that it makes sense for universities to say by and large a 3 year for an MBA is okay for us simply because you're there is so much of work experience in the middle of that,
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Um, but like for an MIM, much like for other masters, you're a fresh graduate. So North America, because see again, this requirement is only for the United States and Canada. So when we look at the United States, they just want to be they just want that assurity that you have the exact number of credits that they can consider you as an undergraduate degree holder. So it has to be either a 4 year undergraduate degree or a degree that is equivalent to a 4 year undergraduate degree. So you would do a third party evaluation and that would confirm the same. But there are a few universities that will take you with a 3 year on a case by case basis. But more often than not, they'll just want to see that equivalency report. Because they don't want to have to look at all these various transcripts from all these parts of the world. Like Australia does a 3 year undergraduate degree, Natasha. UK does it.
Yeah.
Europe does it. So they don't want to be sitting there and looking at each unique transcript and report and then figuring out whether you have it or not. They just want it to be simple and standardized. So they're like, everybody get us an equivalency report, and you would basically need a 4 year undergraduate degree in that case. Um, and on that note, somebody said that even though I'm an engineering student, I want to pursue a career in management consulting. Can I opt for MIM without work experience? Yes, if you do not have work experience and if you have between 0 to 2 years, your 2 years, your 24 months must be before you start the program in August or September, right? So if you're looking at fall 2025, before July, August 2025, by July, August 25, you can have 2 years of work experience. So right now you have pretty much 1.5 years approximately of work experience. And then
I
that would be a
also,
complete sweet spot for you.
yeah, Tripti, I also want to address because I think someone who has asked us a question has mentioned that they are currently an engineering student. So there is one unique opportunity to apply for an MBA if you're thinking of being a part of these super competitive programs where you have the option of applying in your last year of college. You can apply for a certain section of the class which will be open for deferred application. Now, deferred applications would mean that if you're a final year student, you have the option of applying for an MBA class. And if you gain admission, you would not join the class immediately, but you would be expected to defer that admission, gain some years of work experience before you finally join the class. Now, the thing to remember for this is there are very few universities that really offer this option. And when it is offered, it tends to be more competed for than perhaps the overall class profile and the admit rate. So I just want to mention that deferred applications for a full-time MBA program are possible. They are highly competitive, and if you are planning to apply for them, know that you will actually join the class only when you gain some work experience. It's more like just ensuring that you are a standout student, that you want to apply and you think you're going to benefit from and applying to a full-time MBA program. Tripti?
Right, right. Um, and then let's talk a little bit about, is it easier to be admitted to an master's or a master's in management at a competitive university than an MBA? Right, Natasha, you want to take this and then I'll chime in?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that you need to remember is the qualifications or the goals that you have need to be very well spelled out when you're planning to apply for a master's course or an MBA. So an MBA is also a master's course. So, what you need to remember is that when you're applying for any master's program, you're not only applying for the brand or the school that you have on your radar, but you're really applying for a course. And how difficult a course is to get into is not compared between various master's courses, but it is compared with you'll be compared with people who are applying for that specific master's course. So it's not easier or more difficult to get into one course versus the other, but you need to remember that the admission criteria themselves for various master's courses will be very, very different. So you may be a great candidate for an MBA program, but a not so great candidate for an MIM or another master's program in management. And it works vice versa. So do not have only a school on your radar, but look at evaluating your candidature for a particular course and understand whether that course is really going to be of value to you in the future. Because that is what admissions officers will also be evaluating at their end. So don't compare courses, but really compare your candidature with other applicants to that particular cohort. Tripti?
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, yeah. And that is really the most important thing to remember. Prioritize the course over the brand or the perceived brand of a particular school.
Right. And while you're answering question, Natasha, let me just ask you this. Is it required to show proof of tuition fees for both the years before pursuing an MBA, or only first year proof of fees is enough to start with?
Required to show proof of tuition fees for both the years. Um, really, this is quite a specific question. I think you need to look at specific school criteria, because when you gain admission to the school, that is when you really need to look at more detailed conversations around your ability to support yourself through the program. So that would really depend on it wouldn't be MIM or MBA specific, but yes, you will be required to show how you're going to support yourself through the program, and then also for individual years. So yes,
Yeah,
there
so
are quite
typically what they do
yeah.
is they give you a form and you have to fill up that
Mm,
form.
yeah,
Within the application form itself, you have to declare the amount of money that you have. And within
correct.
that, 1 year of annual tuition fee, including accommodation, is something that you can safely mention. You do not have to show proof of funding for 2 years, 2 academic years at one point. For the visa process, it's a different conversation completely. Where
Yeah,
we typically tell people there's 1 year liquid assets and 2 years, 1 year of in fixed assets or whatever. But for the application purposes, if you are showing them 1 year of proof, and it's either you or a direct blood relative you can show as main sponsor, then that's fine. You don't really need to show for 2 years. Most often it's not required, but you should always check, like Natasha said, you should always check the university website to see if any of them wanted 2 years, but unlikely.
yeah.
All right. They also want to know about the difference between competition and acceptance rate between masters and MBA and a regular versus regular MBA. Kindly shed some light. So now when we are looking at acceptance rates and competitiveness, right? Like Natasha just answered the question some time ago, where if a university is highly selective, that university is highly selective for most of its programs. So
Yeah.
suppose let's take a business school, say the Red Pen Business School. The Red Pen Business School has an MBA, has a master's in management and a master's in business analytics. Three programs, same admission team typically. Maybe MBA has some specialists reading it, and maybe MSBA has some other specialists reading it. But overall, it's the core structure is the similar one. Now, when there is somebody who's super competitive, right, like the Red Pen Business School, the best of the best MBA applicants are applying there, and the best of the best MIM applicants are applying there, and the best of the best MSBA applicants are applying there, and then the averages are applying there as well, and then the sub averages are applying there as well. So net, you are competing in a pool of applications that is super competitive, because the university is so competitive that they are only going to pick the best of that lot. All right. In terms of competition, it's not like, well, if I don't go the MBA route and it's tougher for me to get in to the Red Pen Business School through an MBA route, I'll go in through the MSBA route. That's not the case. The only thing that changes is that if you have 3 years work experience, 5 years work experience, you can't apply for an MIM. you're overqualified. But suppose you were looking at masters in finance or masters in financial engineering or masters in business analytics. Now suddenly you have 5 years work ex, relevant work ex or aligned work ex, and you are just a better fit for a business analytics degree. Your entire authentic profile, because the work that you've done in the past, the skills you've built, the realizations you've had, you automatically and organically seem like a better fit with your work experience and your undergrad experience for an MSBA. Then your chances are, of course, better. But that's because organically, authentically, that's a better fit for you. It's not because it's easier to get into an MSBA program. I hope
Yeah.
that point is clear.
Tripti, I'm just going to break from the questions to just tell anyone who is attending this particular session that there is a QR code, there's a unique QR code on this particular webinar. I've displayed it on screen. You could scan this QR code. And if you're looking at, reaching out to us basis this QR code, you can reach out for a free profile evaluation. If you're planning to apply for an MBA program, you can speak to me. I'll be available to speak to individuals, I think, till about the 25th of this month. And if you are interested in an MIM course, you can scan this code and then, say that you'd want to speak to Tripti and, address a lot of your profile specific questions to her. So I think,
Right.
Tripti, we have quite a few questions. We have like about 6 odd minutes to take questions. So there are a few questions. One of the most interesting ones that I'm seeing is how do admissions committees feel about gap year? And we can answer this from both perspectives. So if you'd want to take it from the MIM perspective first.
Yeah. So, Muskan, you've pretty much answered your own question. If you have used that time well, and you have used that time to build certain realizations, explorations, experiences, you're not just sitting and doing Netflix and chill at home, then I don't consider it a gap year. And then, therefore, neither do admission officers. As long as you're able to explain the time and how it relates to your goals, then that's absolutely okay. Natasha, what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, from an MBA perspective, I will say that schools are sensitive to certain business dynamics which may result in someone losing their job. So if you've been in a tech role and unfortunately been a victim of downsizing, that's fine. It's fine to show that gap, but you do need to explain it. And you do need to explain that if you have that gap in your profile, like Tripti mentioned, how have you used it to really improve your skills to make yourself more viable for your next job? If you are spending it on personal development, maybe you took a holiday, maybe you pursued a hobby, not that impressive. But if you used it to develop new professional skills and to really maybe mentor people, maybe you work pro bono with someone, those are great stories to tell. However, if you took a gap year because you wanted to focus on your standardized tests, that's really not something that I would present to business school, because business schools do want to see how you are going to manage multiple responsibilities at the same time. And indicating that you had to take a gap year to do a standardized test, or you had to leave your job because you wanted to focus on your MBA admissions, is not the story that I would tell a competitive business school. So that's my perspective from an MBA. I think another piece that I was really interested in getting your views on, Tripti, was there's a question around how much time is advised to do an MIM, 2012, 18, or 24 months?
Yeah. So the advice to do an MIM is that if you had a realization while you're currently a senior student and you don't really need to work per se to apply for an MIM, the realization and whether you can justify that realization, if you have that in your profile, in your narrative already, then you're good to apply even within 12 months of work experience. It doesn't matter. But max is 24 from the time that you start the program. Right? Don't try and cross that. That would come hard. There's one question I feel like we'll miss out on if we don't go back to is, can I do an MIM after a management grad degree because I want to
Mm.
continue my education? I mean, that just sounds like, I mean, I don't know what is your undergrad degree in, what is your other grad degree in, why do you want to do another master's degree? So, Lisa, this is the one kind of question where you maybe want to just email us and reach out to us, and then we can kind of speak to you one on one, because
Yeah.
it's hard to answer just like that. Basically, we don't have much information on your on your backstory. All right. You have a big doubt for a long time. University of Auckland is the best, but is it good for MIM? Kindly answer this question. Well, University of Auckland, New Zealand is a really strong university. It's a really, really high quality institution. So their business program or their business school will definitely be a strong one. Now, how is Auckland doing in terms of an economy, in terms of job recruitment for international students? Do your research on those elements. And definitely, if you're looking at a strong business school in that economy, you're setting yourself up for success. That's my advice to you. Okay. What are the career opportunities and growth after an MIM? Kush, I think maybe you missed that initial part of the conversation that we were having. Your opportunities are the same. If you're looking at consulting, if you're looking at financial analyst role, if you're looking at doing non-governance, public policies, expertise, strategic work, all of that is same. And MIM just starts at a lower level because the experience base is lower. And MBA starts in the same sector, same industry at a higher level because they're coming from a lot of work experience in their resume. All right.
And I
Natasha,
just want to
this
mention that, yeah, and I just want to mention that if you are in industries like consulting or, you're on the investment banking side, there are very clear post MBA tracks as well that you'd be eligible for after completing your MBA. So it really depends on how you're visualizing your career trajectory. Sorry, I think we mentioned something. Applying to the same university for MSBA, I'm assuming you mean the master's and an MBA. Does it affect anything in particular from the AdCom team's perspective, since you mentioned that the same pool or team might evaluate both applicants? Now, honestly, no, the same team would not evaluate both applicants. If you are applying for an MBA, then you would be evaluated by, AdComs who are looking specifically at the full-time MBA program. If you're applying for a master's course, or an MS course, then you would be evaluated by a different set of individuals. If you're applying for a joint degree where you want to do an MBA as well as complete a master's degree, then you would be evaluated by two separate teams. You would be evaluated primarily by the MBA AdCom, and then you would also be evaluated for a specialized program by a master's admissions team. Tripti, any perspective from the MIM side?
yeah. So, absolutely right. They're different admission officers because their expertise are different. But if you're applying for, suppose you apply to London Business School, for example, and you apply for an MBA, and at the same time you apply for the Masters in Business Analytics, which is called MQM at London Business School. Now they know because they are talking among themselves. They know you've applied for an MBA and an MQM at the same time. Now
Yeah.
they want to know what goals do you have in life that an MBA can also justify and an MSBA can also, because you're going to fit for one of them, right? And if you are somebody who actually has goals that can justify both those programs, by all means, go and apply for both at the same time. But when they are looking and evaluating your fit, they are looking at which program you are a fit for, whether you're a fit for this program or not, right? So obviously you'll get an admit in one place and a reject from the other, for sure. That's definitely going to happen.
We've also had instances where individuals have applied for a certain type of program and they're brilliant candidates, but perhaps just not for that program, where the school has proactively reached out to them and advised them to apply for an alternative specialization or an alternative program within the university. So I just want to mention that if you're a great applicant to the school and they see a fitment in general, there are very rare cases where they may actually reach out and say, what, why don't you look at this particular specialization? But it's not something that's very commonly done.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we've come to the 1 hour mark, Tripti. So, I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. It's a pleasure for us to be on the GMAT Club platform. And like I mentioned, you can look at the QR code, you can scan the QR code and reach out to us if you'd like a free profile evaluation. If you're thinking about an MBA, then you'd be directed to speak with me till about the 25th of this month. Otherwise, you can speak to Tripti if you are interested in an MIM or any other master's program. But it's been a pleasure speaking with everyone today. Thank you,
Yes, I
Tripti.
had a super fun time. Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye bye.